At the luxurious ball, majestic aristocrats crowned the traditions of the art of dance with their noble presence. Waltzes, mazurkas, and polkas blossomed in their elegant movements, like picturesque paintings coming to life to the sound of the music. Ladies in exquisite party dresses glided easily across the marble floor like a feather. And the gentlemen led them with inexhaustible charm, creating an ideal unit of grace and dignity. The young man thanked the charming pink-haired princess for the dance and the pleasant time spent. He bowed and left, but behind the girl another gentleman was waiting for her, who greatly valued her attention. He stood behind the princess and slowly whispered to her if she had a good time with the other young man. This young man was Duke Adler, who right now wanted to hear the answer to his question. The lady became confused and started stuttering, completely forgetting all her words out of fear. She said she danced with Grand Duke Kilian only because the owner of the house said that the guests of honor should dance first. The young man remained silent and then abruptly took her hand. The princess's heart sank with emotion, and at that moment she felt something strange and terrifying was occurring. The duke took her hand and invited her to dance, and the princess had no chance to refuse. He asked her why she danced with another man if she herself said she was in love with him at first sight. The young man leaned in and said he could not leave behind the past of his only woman. And if he smells another man's scent on the lady, he will simply kill them both without asking. Fear and despair were visible in the princess's eyes, because she had no idea what to expect from her husband. Yes, it's better not to forget some things, even if you are busy. One of those things is the fact that the main character of this novel was an immigrant. And the man who was her husband is a future murderer. The day she first moved in was not at all suitable for such serious matters. Tomorrow all empires will have to announce the news of their engagement, and the wedding will take place in 6 months. And her future fiancé was Duke Irenicus von de Madler, a blonde young man with elegant manners. The summary of the novel that the girl was supposed to read just yesterday came to my mind. Before that night, she hadn't rested for about 5 days and was probably very tired from constant work. The novel had suspense and she couldn't stop reading, but the fact that she became the main character turned out to be a reality. Duke Adler greeted his future beautiful wife, who was not that talkative. He said it was the first time they greeted each other in front of His Majesty, the Emperor. The man was outraged by the young lady's behavior and manners, and she would definitely go crazy if he asked her to get engaged to Duke Kilian. The lady thought about it, but had no idea who this Duke Kilian was. The Emperor pointed his finger at the girl and severely warned that if she didn't listen to him this time, he would deprive her of her status as princess. The lady was asked not to do this and to first listen to his opinion. His Highness ordered that the princess and the young man be escorted to the guest room so they could greet each other in private. And he had no intention of listening to her. Duke Adler sat silently opposite his future wife in the living room, obediently fulfilling His Highness's order. The lady noticed that he behaved completely differently in front of the Emperor. Newspaper front pages were filled with his name. Adler was an eligible bachelor of the empire with lots of money, fame, and good looks. And he was the most desirable man, according to Asgard, for the 3rd year in a row. Everyone was eager to know which lucky lady would marry the most desirable fiancé in the entire empire with an impeccable resume. And his fiancée was a sweet lady with silky pink hair and amber eyes who considered herself the most useless bride. After a long silence, the Duke said that since the marriage was one of convenience, they had no other reason to see each other and suggested meeting at the wedding itself. Charlotte knew they would kill her on her wedding day and that this meeting might be the last. In her past life, she worked as a prosecutor in the Anti-Corruption Crimes Unit. She was neck-deep in the murder investigation, but to avoid becoming Charlotte this time, she had to do something. She had to find evidence of a serial killer in the 6 months leading up to her wedding to the Duke. Charlotte smiled and said she fell in love with the young man at first sight and asked him to become her husband. The Duke did not expect to hear this, but decided to listen to what Charlotte would say next. The lady continued by saying she would like to marry for love and not for convenience. Adler was perplexed. Until today, she begged the emperor to marry Duke Kilian. Duke Kilian was not mentioned by His Majesty for nothing. And it seems the princess fell in love with someone. The young man probably did not reciprocate her feelings, and she must have thrown a tantrum. And in that case, her special plan was now full of determination and perseverance. Charlotte smiled tenderly and said that due to Duke Adler's charms, she completely forgot about other men. At that moment, His Majesty entered the hall and apparently decided to visit the future newlyweds. He said that it seems Charlotte has serious feelings for the Duke, and that it is good she came to her senses. The man stood in front of Duke Adler and responsibly said he would hand over his daughter, and that he had no choice but to obey His Majesty's will. Princess Charlotte, radiating in her beauty and nobility, sat motionless in front of an elegant mirror, illuminated by the rays of the bright morning sun. The captivating glow of the sun rays added mystery and mysticism to her appearance. Like lights in the evening sky, enveloping her pink outfit made of soft silk and precious jewels. And Princess Charlotte seemed to merge with the space around her, becoming the perfect reflection of beauty and grace. All she knew from the propaganda was that she had become the rebellious Princess Charlotte, and that her husband, Duke Adler, was suspected of a series of murders. Needing more information, she turned and asked the name of the maid, whose name was Hudson. She has been working here for over 4 years and gets along well with the owners. Charlotte asked, "In that case, you should already know the princess's name." Hudson bowed and said in a frightened voice that the princess's name was Charlotte von der House of Asgard. The princess suddenly asked the maid why the name was so long. And Hudson looked at the lady in surprise. She admitted that she really didn't remember anything that happened until yesterday and didn't even realize who she was. The maid said that her health was not good, and for several days due to the hunger strike. The princess lost her memory. Perhaps the others lasted so long only because they were imbued with anger towards the real Charlotte, who was nicknamed the Scoundrel. And if Hudson had been working here for a full 4 years, it was obvious that she must be a good person. And we can safely say that Charlotte trusted Hudson greatly and appreciated her as an understanding person. The maid smiled and said from now on, she would faithfully serve the princess and she could rely on her safely. Now that she thought about it, the princess showed signs of memory loss and was a very aggressive child in the past. After this, the heroine managed to learn about Charlotte through Hudson. Her mother was the emperor's first concubine and died giving birth, and the emperor, who loved her mother, defied many by officially making her a princess. It would have been very good if she had still been involved in a normal upbringing. But unfortunately, he didn't worry too much about his daughter after giving her the status of princess. It was natural that the empress and her legitimate children disliked her, and the nobles also paid her no attention. And she was only a princess on paper, but not in society. Hudson said that she actually convinced His Majesty to marry the black-haired Duke Kilian. But it was a story of unrequited love, and he openly despised the mischievous Charlotte. But despite her eccentric behavior, a certain Duke Adler agreed to marry her. And the benefit he found was very interesting. Charlotte asked Hudson to bring yesterday's newspaper because she needed to get at least some benefit. And if there is a topic about a serial killer, it means this is the most discussed topic in the news right now with an open investigation. The princess found out that there were only 4 victims so far, and she urgently needed information before becoming the 8th. Charlotte stood up and said she urgently needed a responsible assistant for an important matter. The princess decided to look for an assistant among the prisoners. She was sure they would better understand villains and their moves. Hudson was surprised to hear such unusual qualities in the candidate, but did not ask for details. She introduced her cousin, Stanford, who works as a prison guard and had already been warned. He loudly called out to prisoner number 221 to come out of the cell. Stanford asked the lady to be very careful because the young man had previously attacked nobles. The young man said that if the princess wants to torture him for fun, then it's better not to. Hudson warned, John attacked the lieutenant and also attacked nobles hoping to reach nobility. He dared to express an opinion that went beyond the prison, but an encounter with John Watson could prove dangerous for the princess. Charlotte said she knew everything and asked to be alone with the prisoner to ask him a couple of questions. She had no intention of inflicting torture, but offered to earn his respect and loyalty. Charlotte said she could pay the bail by showing her ID. The young man did not understand why she would do this, and if she was going to play with him, she would soon regret it. Charlotte said she was looking for someone and wanted him to help her for 6 months. She came because she knows that John used to help the imperial family and had a good reputation. And if he accepts her offer, he will become a servant in the princess's chambers. And besides the deposit, he will receive a salary. The young man asked if it would be possible to call the princess mistress, and this question meant his complete agreement. In the library, the princess met a young man who tearfully asked her for forgiveness and begged her for mercy. He probably saw the princess for the first time in the library. From now on, he will have to get used to it. And now they will see each other often. She gave him a special list and asked him to provide her with all the books written there. Charlotte was incredibly good at studying and quickly memorized everything written in the textbooks. Mr. Watson had already been released and would never have thought he could end up in the princess's chambers. She asked not to observe such a strict chain of command with her, and the young man suggested communicating informally because it is not necessary to address subordinates by their name. By stack, Charlotte asked him to fulfill her first request. John needed to read the list and burn the paper. The young man asked if the lady really wanted him to gather all the information about the serial killers, and that it would be great to see detailed records. A maid entered the room with a message. His Highness ordered the princess to attend today's breakfast. Breakfast was a weekly event where the emperor met with all his children. And they conversed. Of course, it was not just breakfast. Ministers also participated in it. They assess which of the emperor's children could take the throne, and usually, Charlotte rarely attended those breakfasts, as she was the last person who could take the throne. Hudson said that His Majesty would increase his patronage of the princess if she made a good impression on him. Therefore, Charlotte had to go to breakfast and introduce herself in front of all the relatives and dignitaries. The emperor took the opportunity and announced that Charlotte was late for breakfast. The lady replied in a calm voice that she apologized and that she saw the invitation too late. The emperor's firstborn, Prince Frederick, sarcastically said that the maid supposedly didn't read the invitation. And his younger sister, Camilla, supported him with a caustic statement that she had never seen Charlotte read. The emperor said he invited Charlotte because Duke Adler was also present today, and their engagement was a favorable event for the empire. Camilla laughed. It was only because Charlotte lost weight in a hunger strike that she managed to move from Duke Kilian to Duke Adler. They never accepted Charlotte and were sure that she lacked the education and culture for her status. Charlotte always felt uncomfortable among the emperor's children. An important topic was discussed at breakfast. A good harvest was expected this year, and if this continues, prices might fall. The guests presented a proposal to use the army to plow the fields and reduce supplies to maintain the same price, and one of the emperor's sons asked, would Charlotte like to express her opinion? The girl didn't need the throne anyway and was just going to watch, but she might soon just not be able to stand it if the young man continued. Charlotte replied that all the proposals presented would in no way help solve the problem. And the army will clearly be unhappy because their task now is to collect wheat in the fields. The young man was outraged by the girl's opinion and said she had no idea what she was talking about. Frederick's proposal focused solely on the balance between demand and prices, and Camilla's proposal was much better than Frederick's. Trade would have worked in the modern world, but not in this one. The empire subjugated other states, and these states repeatedly tried to regain their independence. Camilla was satisfied with her idea, against which Frederick had nothing to offer. Some thought that exporting grain to neighboring countries would be an excellent food supply. But Charlotte was sure that this was complete nonsense. Charlotte's proposal was to stop growing wheat and instead select farms that grow fruit and vegetables and pay them subsidies, then the wheat harvest will decrease. Camilla vehemently rejected the idea of growing vegetables and fruits on land used for growing wheat. Charlotte has spoken, everything is settled. They will be able to produce barley and make liquor from it for sale. And then there will be no problems with export. The lady was right, and for the emperor revealed a completely different side. And some people definitely did not like it. The emperor announced that from now on the princess would be present at breakfast every week. The breakfast ended. Camilla, passing by Charlotte, angrily whispered to her that the lady shouldn't be too happy, and that she was just lucky. Compared to criminals, royalty swears much more elegantly in any case. Charlotte had a completely different goal. Today was supposed to be her date with Duke Adler. Everything in the novel was the same before, but one small detail changed. And that was that Duke Adler was now openly and shamelessly observing the princess. They sat at a round table in an open-air viewpoint, and from the start, the lady clearly sensed the tense atmosphere. She wanted to calm the situation and suggested just calling her Charlotte, but the Duke refused without hesitation. The princess considered him stubborn and probably too hasty, so she asked permission to ask his lordship some questions. The princess smiled sweetly and said she wanted to know more about the Duke, because she supposedly fell in love at first sight for the first time. The Duke agreed that he would answer questions and even try to give honest answers. The princess was pleased with this turn of conversation and gladly prepared to ask the first question. She wanted to divide Duke Adler like a stupid and naive child and asked him the first question: who was his first love? The most important thing in a murder case is the motive, so it was important to know all the details. And first of all, about the suspect's past, which can quickly shed light on the whole situation, especially if he killed his wife on their wedding night. But immediately, the motive of jealousy comes to mind. So far, there is a hypothesis that the Duke had a mistress, but the emperor forced him to marry his daughter. The lady continued playing the role of an affectionate and playful fiancé and tirelessly spoke of the Duke's virtues. She said that Adler didn't need to hide anything from her, and that she considered herself a person with a broad perspective, and that she could treat her man's past with understanding. It turned out that the Duke had never been in love, and Charlotte raised her head proudly, confident that this place would be destined for her. The Duke also expressed his desire to ask a question. He asked if the princess simply never abandons what she assumed, and if the young man was one of those options. He said he suddenly became interested in the motive for all this and what was so special about it. Charlotte knew that if she didn't answer, she might arouse suspicion and she should have devised something. Blonde hair that shone like sunlight over a wheat field, deep eyes the color of a serene lake, and soft porcelain skin with a sharp nose and attractive lips. And the princess replied that the list could go on forever. After the date, she reached her room and collapsed on the bed, and that day was very tough. Not only physically, but mentally as well. Hudson notified that Mr. John Watson was waiting for her in the parlor, and that if the lady was tired, she could send him away. Charlotte asked him to come into the room and apologized for not coming out, but she simply didn't have the strength to leave the bedroom. John brought her an envelope with the documents she requested that morning. These were the records from the Imperial Investigation Office. They stated that strange murders were happening in the city, and every week there was a victim. And the cause of death for everyone was suffocation. Every single victim was strangled, which means the suspect must be strong and trained. John supposed it could be a man over 180 cm tall, but that prevented them from knowing the motive. And they couldn't prove the Duke's involvement based solely on that data. John asked if she could find out why the fragile princess started investigating a serial killer. Charlotte asked John to find out about her husband, Duke Adler, and not to ask unnecessary questions. And she wanted to know everything. And the more personal the information, the better. She still couldn't share the reason for the investigation with John, and the villain could use the information against her. So she sent a summons to Duke Adler to investigate, which meant he shouldn't have been here yet. The young man sat at his desk and signed important land declaration documents. The servant brought letters to the Duke, and among them, Adler found a letter from Charlotte. The reply didn't take long to arrive, and within a few hours, Hudson rushed into the princess's bedroom with an envelope in her hands. She said this letter was from the Duke, and Charlotte was surprised. He had been shy for so long, but now he decided to reply and invited the girl to meet near the opera today at 7 in the evening. Hudson immediately hurried to get ready, because there was very little time left. Duke Adler appeared at the palace dressed in an exquisite black suit that perfectly highlighted his high status. And elegance, and the black color of the suit emphasized his power and authority, giving him a mysterious appearance. And charming. They headed to the distinguished guest seats. The Duke said he had heard that tickets were very hard to get, because it was the best performance in the entire empire. The lady got the feeling that the young man didn't want to talk, and he was forced to come against his will. The princess admitted that she wasn't interested in the performance at all, and would be happy just seeing his face. Adler replied that he greatly regretted not having that opportunity. And he cannot see the princess every day because he is very busy, and they will be able to see each other in a week. Charlotte replied in a soft voice that she would like to see him every day, but twice a week was enough for now. Charlotte woke up on his shoulder to the Duke's voice, who asked her to open her eyes. The hall was already empty, and everything was over, and the princess realized that she had slept through the entire opera due to her lack of sleep. And she sincerely believed that the Duke could not consider her rude or uncultured. Adler wondered if he was the reason for her sleep deprivation, because she wanted to see him every day. And very possibly couldn't sleep. She didn't even have to find a reason, because the young man had already answered his own question. He offered to discuss the next meeting in advance so that the lady could get some sleep. A few days later, Hudson brought the lady an invitation to her debutante ball, telling her that Grand Duke Kilian would also be coming. The princess replied that she was no longer interested in him, and Hudson could write a negative reply. But the serial killer is not asleep, but he still hasn't been able to find a connection between his crimes. The killer's first victim was the governess of Count Moston. The murderer committed his atrocity not because he had a mental illness, but because he had a motive for it. And maybe he could find a motive or a clue if he observed how the victim's family lived. But Charlotte suddenly changed her mind and decided to act strictly according to her plan. She opened a closet with a bunch of dresses hanging up and told me when to wear them then. But now, Hudson's deep sigh seemed to be heard in the courtyard, and the maids realized that the lady was clearly having a difficult day. They had to choose between a white sequin dress that looked like a wedding dress, a low-cut, plunging dress, or a dress that looked like cotton candy with lace. In her previous life, Charlotte loved to wear clothes to stand out and attract the Duke's attention. None of the options were suitable, and the maid sadly said that she had already spent all the funds. And only one dress remained, which Charlotte had never worn in the past. Charlotte and the Duke were on their way to a ball, and the lady said that if the young man was busy, she didn't have to show up as his partner. She asked what his letter was about, in which she wrote that she missed him very much. But for some reason, the princess was surprised to hear that he was sending the letter personally to the Duke. Charlotte took the letter, read it, and saw that the lines were somehow broken. The young man asked if it was true that the princess really liked him, but he didn't understand why she then asked him not to appear as a partner. And the lady thought he would be happy. Or maybe there was something here that Duke Adler wanted to hide or do. She replied that it was only because she didn't want the Duke to do something he didn't like just on a whim. The Duke planned to attend Lady Moston's ball, and if he didn't attend as the bride's partner, his reputation would suffer. Charlotte had to keep a stiff upper lip and communicate flirtatiously with the Duke. So she decided to ask if it would be appropriate to wear a low-cut dress for the ball. The young man replied that he didn't want to look old-fashioned in front of everyone, and so she would wear something revealing in front of everyone. In this life, Charlotte didn't really like wearing the provocative outfits hanging in her wardrobe. She thought she probably looks like a slut, and that's why Duke Adler seems so annoyed. Charlotte's goal was very simple: to provide the princess with extra income. The princess arrived when all the guests were already gathered and chatting pleasantly at the festive table. It was strange, but even as a princess, Charlotte had a small budget. And today, she was going to earn more trust from the emperor. Surprisingly, the duke was the first to greet her and politely bowed his head in greeting. Camilla was dissatisfied with something again, and this time she scolded the maid for bringing pancakes with nuts. The maid said the chef was busy now, and Camilla told the maid to eat these pancakes herself. Camilla loudly asked what was on the agenda for today, while the maid held the plate with trembling hands. The man said they needed to discuss the influence of magic stones and the missing mages of the empire, and chart a course for the future. He suggested listening to the opinion of Princess Charlotte, who proposed a wonderful idea last time. The emperor asked the girl to express her opinion and not be afraid of condemnation from outsiders. And under no circumstances could she fail so that her reputation would not collapse. Because it was impossible to let all the aristocrats think that the princess was just lucky last time. Camilla suddenly screamed in fear, and the maid collapsed to the floor in front of her, losing consciousness. Charlotte didn't waste a second and hurried to examine the maid, while Camilla didn't understand what the princess was doing. Her lips and legs turned blue, dark brown spots appeared on her skin, and the princess ordered not to touch anything under any circumstances. In particular, she ordered not to eat anything from the table or inhale anything. This murder was different from the others, and most likely the murderer could have been someone else. Charlotte warned that there were signs of cyanide poisoning on the maid's body, and that clearly someone was trying to poison those present. And the imperial family opened their mouths in surprise, looking in horror at the poisoned maid. The gentleman thanked the princess and said confidently that only thanks to her they managed to avoid a disaster. They tested the powdered sugar sprinkled on the pancakes and found that it contained cyanide impurities. And Charlotte was very lucky this time with a clue. Before her death, the maid made a mistake. She regretted throwing away the food that Camilla rejected. Someone sprinkled powder on the dishes and food, and the maid who served it ended up eating the poisoned cake. Charlotte wondered if it was the chef's doing, as he was the last one to serve the food. But the chef wasn't there that day, and the main courses were prepared with a substitute sauce. But he does not admit his guilt, and says that he does not understand how this happened, and the main suspect was the head. As reported earlier, the chef was not there that day, but he is planning the menu for the week. All dishes are under his responsibility, and he could have done something with powdered sugar. And then leave. Salt and sugar were very expensive ingredients in the empire, and the sauce would have used them. Charlotte said it was probably worth arresting the chef before he gets away and escapes. As expected, the imperial family chef was caught while trying to cross the border. And it turned out he was a spy from Cordy who had infiltrated the palace some time ago. The empire subjugated the state of Cordy 7 years ago, and since then the Cordy have constantly fought for their independence. And the failed attempt on the emperor's life by a Cordy spy only caused even greater unrest. The emperor thanked the princess for her contribution and doubled her budget. And it turns out she caught the criminal and her reputation grew significantly. That night, the princess stayed in the library until it got dark, and it was very late. Charlotte heard creaking behind her and got very scared, as if a boss really wanted to poison His Majesty. What if she worked in a team? Especially since many people hate Charlotte. While the princess walked quickly in the dark, lost in thought. She didn't even notice how she stumbled over a stone and fell. John suddenly appeared in front of her, who said he heard her screams, and that's why he ran quickly. She clung to his chest crying, trembling with fear. But it was just a cute cat running nearby and scaring the princess in the dark. John laughed. Really, the girl was asking for help because of an ordinary cat. But the lady was indignant because it was dark. She asked him to stop laughing and talk better about her successes in terms of work. She said that Duke Adler leads a very lonely personal life, and no scandals or rumors have been noticed about him. But his father, Duke Adler Lord, was not that person at all, and his family history was too complicated. His biological mother died of an illness 5 years ago, and the current Duchess Adler became his stepmother. They had a tense relationship, but he is very close to his own younger sister, Princess Bloomer. Charlotte asked if John knew that the Duke had not served in the army since graduating from military academy. Everyone says that was a fact. In the Asgardian Empire, experience in the army could help secure a promotion. And since the emperor gained fame after winning battles, he took good care of his soldiers. The first victim, who was a governess, also worked in Duke Adler's household. John asked how the princess could investigate the case of a serial killer when she was so timid, and even walked insecurely. She said she dismissed all the guards because they were not like Killian, and she was going to look for another good replacement. John looked closely at the lady and nominated his worthy candidacy out loud. Charlotte, the maid, and John went to choose dresses for the princess at a fashion boutique. And Lady Hudson was a little indignant about these changes and strongly recommended that Lord Watson properly protect his princess. She looked with disdain at the young man who asked if he should come here. The princess asked the maid to be more lenient, and John protects her completely free of charge. Hearing this, Hudson's face changed, and she thanked John for his help in protecting the princess. There is very little time left until young Lady Mostyn's official debut, and the merchant reported that almost all dresses are already sold out. Charlotte said it was fine. The main thing was that the dress was sophisticated and worthy of her, and she asked John to sit on the sofa and not stand behind him. The princess said she would try on different dresses and that they would both have to help her choose. Charlotte came out in an elegant black dress, but Hudson thought it didn't highlight her enough. The next outfits were ridiculous and inappropriate, leaving very few options. Strangely enough, the delicate blue lace dress she tried on last was perfect for Charlotte. John felt noticeably embarrassed seeing the princess in such a charming outfit, and even admitted that she looked quite beautiful. He also asked the lady to eat better, and yesterday's wound, received when stumbling over a stone, had not healed completely. Charlotte liked her choice and told the merchant she was going to buy this beautiful dress. Charlotte overheard voices coming from the cafe, where the ladies were discussing the upcoming debut ceremony with interest. One of her acquaintances criticized someone from the imperial family, and it was probably about Charlotte. The princess directed her attention to the girls and said she couldn't leave even without a cup of tea when they met like this by a fateful accident. She hoped to find out something, but the ladies were only gossiping about someone's weddings and relationships. The 3 girls here were daughters of families that supported Camilla and followed her everywhere like maids. They couldn't deny her a tea party, as Charlotte was a princess, but it was as if they deliberately didn't allow the lady to participate in the conversation and discuss her urgent problems. Camilla said she promised her mother that they would have dinner together today and asked the blonde lady if she would join them this time. Soon the girls thanked her for the interesting conversation and left the cafe. Charlotte never found out anything. She politely stopped the remaining girl and asked her to come to her senses and not invest in the perfume business that Lady Christina was talking about. And even a hedgehog should understand that this whole idea is a complete sham and a trap. How could there be a guarantee of large profits if the business hasn't even opened yet? And besides, there is no material manifestation of this business, but only fundraising. She said this as someone who had experience with scammers, and the guarantee of large profits is always equal to the word scam. And you might find it hard to believe, but it's not worth investing in this business. Charlotte asked her to remember her words, and that she would definitely tell her all about it in more detail, since they would soon be related. This young lady was Duke Adler's younger sister, whose name was Blair von Dam Adler. After their conversation, Hudson became worried because these women are known to be arrogant when supporting Camilla. The maid said that a recently ordered dress had arrived at a fashion boutique. But Charlotte was very surprised when she opened the box, because it was a completely different dress, and the fashion boutique probably sent the wrong dress by mistake. But for such carelessness, it was too expensive. With it was a note on which it was written that on the day of Lady Mostyn's debut, she would be picked up at the palace at 6 o'clock. And the Duke's signature. Charlotte whispered to John to take his carriage and go with Count Mostyn. And then wait somewhere nearby until the end of the holidays, just in case. Charlotte went out to the living room, where a handsome, elegantly dressed young man was already waiting for her. The Duke took the girl's hand and could not take his eyes off her dazzling beauty. They got into the carriage and left. The princess noticed the Duke's elegant tailcoat and was sure that no one could overshadow him today. The young man looked thoughtfully out the window and asked if it turned out that the princess had fallen in love with him again. The ball in honor of Lady Mostyn's debut into society had already begun, and the guests were murmuring about the well-known Duke Adler. Both the most coveted bachelor in the empire and his useless princess were the first topic of gossip for the aristocrats. Marquis Breguet approached the Duke and politely greeted the young man and his beautiful companion. He said he thought he had gone crazy, because it's hard to catch people like that at events like this. The Marquis responded to the princess's appeal, and she said she had decided to broaden her clothing preferences. And she was grateful for his consideration. And if he had known that the princess was of such a meek nature, he himself would have sought her hand, and would have offered himself as a fiancé. The Marquis asked to take Duke Adler with him for a while for an important private conversation. After all, he appears so rarely in secular society that everyone will take off their tailcoats. And the dress out of curiosity. Charlotte smiled cheerfully and agreed, and she would have to play this role of a cute girl. And sweet throughout the event. The princess looked at the guests present and was sure that these people didn't care about her. And Duke Adler stood out strangely among all these deceitful and fake people. They were all there, and maybe Charlotte had dressed provocatively in the past to attract attention. And if you think about it, on the contrary, it was better to behave more simply to attract less attention. The princess walked down the aisle and met someone the Archduke of the northern part would least like to see. James von Demkalian. He was never afraid of the imperial family and did not hide his opinion about any of the family members. Therefore, he never missed an opportunity to openly disgrace Charlotte, who had been attached to him for a long time. The heroine wanted to restore Charlotte's dignity, or rather her own. At least in Killian's eyes. She firmly told him that he should know that turning his back on her and not greeting members of the royal family was an insult to the crown. Killian replied that there was no point in weaving intrigues here, let alone threatening his honor and dignity. She decided to warn him in advance not to forget manners, because next time she might file charges for insulting the crown. The princess turned around and was about to leave, and Killian had seen such brazen behavior in a girl for the first time. She said that, as he knows, the lady is engaged to Duke Adler, so she asks him to get rid of the idea that she might still feel something for him. The princess was interested in more important matters, so she headed to the back room of Count Mostyn's residence on the second floor. Thanks to John's note, she easily found the first victim's room. But suddenly, she started coughing. The princess had a strange allergic reaction, and it was necessary to leave quickly before the reaction began to progress. But the maid of the Mostyn residence was already standing in front of her, and it could not be allowed for the rumor to spread that the princess was investigating a murderer's case. In series, it seems this maid was aware that Charlotte was a princess, and now she needed to get out of here without creating suspicion. Charlotte decided to take advantage of her status and asked how such maids were hired for the Mostyn residence. The girl lowered her head and asked for forgiveness without even understanding why she was apologizing. Charlotte asked who was responsible for cleaning this room, and as soon as she entered, she got hives. She reported that most likely her hives were not due to dust, but to fresh peaches. The man who lived in this room was always experimenting with peaches. They say there was peach lint in every crack of the furniture here, and all the maids who cleaned here complained of hives. Charlotte didn't know if this information would help her, and right now, it was just a detail about one of the victims. It seems the maid still didn't understand that she was a princess. Charlotte couldn't understand what the connection was between the serial killer and the peaches. Suddenly, she heard someone talking. Someone was dissatisfied that Mr. Ian could run away with the money so brazenly. It was the same ladies from the cafe, and the princess passed by thinking this did not concern her. Clearly, someone was pressing behind the door, and the princess still couldn't pass. She was not mistaken. The girl she talked to in the cafe was standing in front of Camille and her friends with tears in her eyes. The princess entered the room and asked what such important girls were doing here. One of them rudely replied that this was none of Charlotte's business and that she shouldn't meddle in their affairs. He said that Lady Blair, who is crying, will soon become part of their family. And this definitely worries her. And unlike those fools, Blair was not a victim of scammers and did not lose her money. Camilla was indignant at the princess's behavior, who dared to call them stupid. They openly took out their anger on the innocent Blair, who initially had no intention of contributing financially, and said she would think about the offer. One of the girls started being rude. Supposedly they had no idea that Lady Blair was so fickle, and probably learned this from someone who changes men like gloves. Charlotte replied if the lady really wanted to hear accusations of insulting the crown. The girl replied that she didn't name anyone, and that it was strange that something could offend Charlotte. The princess stated that punishment for insulting the royal family can be obtained not only legally. The lady clearly wanted to continue the conversation and asked what the princess could do to her that was so terrible. Charlotte picked up a bottle of wine and loudly said that fists work much faster than the law. And her method of distress Charlotte worked quickly. She asked Blair not to think about anything else and was only going to scare them. The girl sadly said that the princess was right and that the business turned out to be a scam. Mr. Ian, who initiated all this, turned out to be in debt for a huge amount. And she was very grateful that the princess warned her. The princess dropped the bottle from her hands, and at that moment, the excited Duke Adler entered the room. He saw a broken bottle on the floor and asked the lady to explain what was happening. Charlotte admitted that she accidentally broke the bottle while Blair was running to her brother. He saw the ladies he was friends with running out of this room screaming. But not everything was as he had thought. The Duke insisted. He definitely heard something break. For some reason, he was angry with Charlotte and accused her of lying to him. He asked the princess not to make any more excuses and was sure that something had changed in her. And in his opinion, it turned out that people don't change their nature so quickly, and his eyes said that he definitely didn't believe a single word of what she was saying. It is possible that the Duke doesn't even want to try to believe her, as it seems he doesn't want to know anything more about her. But the only truth was that the princess sincerely wanted to help her sister protect herself. Perhaps the reason Duke Adler would kill her was simple hatred, and the lady no longer had the strength to be angry. John approached her and asked if the princess liked the ball. The lady sadly said she didn't dance, and the young man laughed. Dancing is a stupid idea where everyone just spins around. He offered to drive her carriage because Charlotte was going back without the Duke's accompaniment. It was already too dark, and Charlotte decided to walk together. The young man offered to carry her in his arms if the lady was tired and wanted to rest. He skillfully picked her up in his arms, and the princess was thus able to rest a little. The young man joked, "The lady weighs like a feather, and there is not a single strong point in her body." And at that moment, they were not alone. Duke Adler was watching them, and the princess saw him from afar. John smiled and said, the dress she chose back then in a fashion boutique suited her much better. This morning, Charlotte seemed annoyed and refused to write a letter to the Duke for the first time in days. John ran to the living room, and Hudson was indignant because Mr. Watson had absolutely no manners. Charlotte said she had no plans for today, so she didn't need security yet. The princess couldn't understand what the urgency was and why the young man still wasn't leaving. John said they found a fifth victim at 5 in the morning and that he probably knew this man. The fifth victim was the Commander Marquis Breguet, whom she saw yesterday. The Adler family had always distinguished itself by its high status and great wealth in the empire. Irenicus von dem Adler, Reniculus for short, inherited the best genes from his ideal parents, and later became the most coveted bachelor in the entire empire, before whom young ladies did not yield. However, a great misfortune came into Renicuse's ideal life. He had never accepted a single marriage proposal and ordered all invitations and letters coming from girls to be burned unread. His mother was worried about his marriage and the fact that the young man was not interested in any girl. In reality, the Duke was only concerned with one issue: his mother's health. She said she always wanted to see his fiancée before her death, which was already near. As a result, neither the mother's nor the son's wish came true, and his sister and the Duke were left without a mother. His father asked to greet a stranger, whom he introduced as his new mother. They met when he was serving in Corti, and the Duke was sure his mother was still healthy when they met. The death of his mother, his father's indignation, and his new stepmother, all these misfortunes made Renicuse's heart freeze. After this, Renicuse's life ended, and his chapter as Duke of Adler began, which was wrapped only in darkness. One day, the emperor asked him if he would like to marry his youngest daughter, and the Duke replied that it would be a great honor for him. Renicuse could not resist his majesty's will, even though he was not at all fond of his fiancée. And he married only to preserve his rights to the mines. He was disgusted by this marriage of convenience, and the lady, in addition to this, shamelessly desired a relationship. The more their encounter with the useless princess progressed, the more she fell in love with him. And since she liked him so much, it would be rude not to respond to her with sincere sympathy. Before that opera, the Duke ordered premium class tickets that cost 3 times as much. He thought the princess would like these expensive tickets, but when she fell asleep on his shoulder, he wanted to be patient for a while and then remove the empty head from his shoulder. The 5th song was playing, and if you think about it, the Duke was not a stranger. And this should not violate the rules of chastity. That day he stroked her head, while she slept, and decided to let the lady sleep to avoid such embarrassment next time. And then he decided that it was necessary to determine the exact time of their meeting, so that she could sleep peacefully. After that, every debut day was a disaster for the Duke, and Charlotte's wink during breakfast was so sweet that he couldn't get it out of his head. At some point, Renicuse became dependent on Charlotte's praise. He received an invitation to a ball. But Adler was disgusted by such events. Then he asked to adjust this event to his schedule and thought that the princess would probably want to go with him. The Duke asked the assistant what it could mean when a girl said she wanted to meet somewhere alone. And supposedly, he is not asking for himself, but for his friend, and most likely she wants some kind of secret meeting. And in any case, if his friend needs him, he must be ready. The Duke had been unable to concentrate on anything at work for a long time, and he quickly needed to meet the princess and find out what she was doing. Charlotte said that, if the young man doesn't want to, perhaps he won't be her partner at the debut. And she wouldn't want her beloved Duke to be bothered by unpleasant matters. But the Duke replied that if he didn't do it with his fiancée as a partner, his reputation could suffer. That day, the princess asked if it would be appropriate to wear a low-cut dress to an event. And after that, the young man decided to buy Charlotte a dress that didn't look provocative. He had very little time left to renew his rights to the mines, and it wouldn't be a bad idea to show his loyalty to the crown. None of the provided dress designs satisfied the Duke, and he and his assistant personally went to the fashion house. In the window display, he was attracted to a lilac dress from the new collection, decorated with delicate black lace. Without thinking, the Duke headed towards the entrance of the clothing boutique, and the assistant could barely keep up with him. The lady said this dress had already been promised to another lady, and asked to be forgiven for such insolence. She said there was no doubt that he chose the dress because it was flawless, but it was reserved by the daughter of Viscount Whittaker. The young man asked if the lady had forgotten who he was and asked to sell her that dress from the window. He offered to pay 3 times more, and that should be more than enough. He decided to give this dress to the princess on the day of the breakfast, but an unexpected incident occurred with food poisoning. The young man was surprised that the princess became the main person in discovering the criminal. But moreover, it seemed strange to him that the person he started looking for was him. On the day of the ball, the Duke liked that she gave him a dress where nothing unnecessary was visible. However, he noticed that even without this, the princess attracts too much attention from men, especially Marquis Breguet, who even in military academy competed with the Duke in everything. He always disliked his false friendship, and every word he said was unbearable to the Duke. That day, the princess happily agreed to his urgent conversation with the Marquis. And if he had shown his displeasure a little, she would have happily stayed close. The Marquis joked that he saved the Duke from the clutches of the most terrible woman and brought him before the guests. There were already rumors that the dress Princess Charlotte was wearing was supposedly taken from the Viscount's daughter. The girl expressed her resentment because she had been looking for a suitable one for so long, and even put it on hold. And the princess supposedly came out of nowhere and started demanding that they give her this particular dress. And the Viscount's daughter had to give it up. The Duke asked how the lady knew this story, and she said she herself had been in that shop where the princess told her many unpleasant things. The young man looked closely at the girl and asked her to repeat again if her words were true. She confirmed her words, but was surprised when the Duke said in front of everyone that he personally came to the shop and bought this dress, and that it was very brazen of her to spread false gossip. And if her memory did not fail her, she does not recall Lady Whittaker being there with him at that time. He said that the lady clearly has talent, that she came up with such a story right after seeing the princess's dress, whereby her reservation was cancelled. The girl shouted, in any case, the fact that she couldn't wear a dress because of the princess is still true. And she called herself a victim of this situation. The Duke warned that if the lady was going to lie, she should at least do it with the truth. And he would not tolerate any more false information about his fiancée. The Marquis that day expressed the opinion that Charlotte did not have a good reputation. And she was known for the fact that every second word she said was a lie. And the young man replied that it was not for the person who deals with the dirtiest things to judge her. The young man was surprised how the affairs of a brave commander could be considered dirty. Duke Kilian's arrival was announced, and all those present paid attention. Duke Kilian, as usual, was sought after by many girls, but Adler considered him too naive. The Marquis, behind the Duke's back, spoke enthusiastically about his relationship with Charlotte, that he hadn't even touched her with a finger yet. His words were too rude and brazen, and it seemed like the Duke heard every one of his words. He decided to ask if the young man thought he was already going too far. The Duke did not consider it necessary to let such an act go unnoticed, but he pulled a handkerchief out of his pocket. He handed it to the Marquis and told him he would have to answer for his words. He suggested that perhaps the reason for his refusal as a partner was the presence of Duke Kilian at the event. And passing by the door, he heard the girls screaming that Princess Charlotte was angry. And he saw them running out of the room horrified. He found the princess standing in front of her sister, with a broken bottle of wine lying on the floor. And Adler could only think of one thing, that his fiancée was truly behaving inappropriately. Then he shouted at her that she shouldn't try to justify herself, and Charlotte silently left his company. And after her departure, everything turned out in a strange way. Her sister did not understand why he did this to Charlotte, and the Duke only asked her to remain formal in a public place. She said that the princess helped her when the ladies were being intimidated, and that the bottle fell by accident. Her sister cried and tried to explain everything to him beforehand, but her brother didn't even listen to anyone. Lady Blair sobbed and didn't know how to look the princess in the eye after this. The Duke left the room and excitedly ran to find Charlotte, who turned out to be innocent of everything. In the evening, Princess Charlotte was on the balcony, surrounded by the soft light of twilight. Her long dress shimmered against the setting sun, as if filled with magic, and her hair fluttered slightly in the wind. Adler badly wanted to approach her and explain everything, to ask for forgiveness for what happened. But he saw her with someone else. John carried her in his arms to the carriage to escort her, and Duke Adler watched them that fateful night. For several days after the ball, Charlotte did not write him letters that she used to send continuously. Her sister swore that her brother was the stupidest person, and Charlotte definitely felt offended by him. And if she were in his place, she wouldn't want to see him either. Initially, They were still going to see each other only at the wedding, and the Duke tried to convince himself that he didn't care at all. But at that moment, the servant brought a letter from Charlotte and delivered the unexpected news. And right now, the princess is under investigation. Hours before Renicues became pensive, Charlotte and John were busy investigating a new crime. John said that at that moment, Marquis Breguet was well built, so the criminal should have the same strength, if not more. Charlotte was serious about not stopping her investigation due to some feelings of unease. John reported that the body was found on Node Lane, which was a poor neighborhood infested with homeless people and criminals. The lady asked if it would be very suspicious if the princess wanted to examine the victim's body. Usually the most important evidence of a murder is the body, and this time Charlotte had to see it with her own eyes. The princess said that in any case, she needed to check the body and the wig. And Hudson's evening dress, which she secretly took to avoid unnecessary questions, would help her in this. The lady looked nothing like Charlotte, but the young man reassured her. No one would check the princess in such a place. The girl's plan was for John to watch her from afar, and as soon as he saw that the investigators had caught her, he would have to follow her. To match the level, Charlotte drank a bottle of wine, gathered her courage, and began to behave violently towards the guards. And this was the easiest crime for which she could end up behind bars, and this news wouldn't even reach the emperor. As a result, security took her away and put her behind bars for violent behavior and drunk vandalism. She pretended to be an eccentric girl, shouted, and demanded that the guards let her out of the cell. The guard said that if the lady kept drinking until she passed out, her story might end badly. And this morning, a murder had already been committed. Charlotte began to desperately ask to go to the bathroom, and the guard called her an extremely annoyed alcoholic. Charlotte shouted, "I have the right not to let her into the women's restroom," and promised to complain to her boss. And the man clearly won't want to take responsibility for his actions if she goes to the bathroom right in the cell. And he shouldn't have underestimated Charlotte's experience, who had dealt with the most violent criminals. The lady was very lucky. The guard asked her to do her business quickly and return to the cell while he was away on a murder case. Usually, no trouble is expected from a drunk girl, so now everyone is busy with the murder case. Charlotte found the morgue door and stood next to the body they had found that morning. She carefully lifted the sheet and saw a young man with a pale and lifeless face. And he didn't look strangled. If he died from suffocation, the blood would pool in his face, but the Marquis's face is clean. There were no signs of resistance on his body, and a person with military training would clearly have defended himself. The red marks were in completely different places, and it looked like a reaction from poisoning. He was poisoned. And then the cause of death was faked as strangulation. Charlotte left the morgue and didn't know how developed the field of forensic medicine was here. But it was clear that the investigators had been deceived by the criminal. A passing security guard asked if the lady was sober yet. She held in her hands a box with evidence that killed all the victims, so he ordered her to go to the cell and sit quietly, as if everyone was busy with an important investigation. After a while, John stood near the cell where Charlotte was locked up and said that anyone he knew could not be released from custody, and that things with him were different. Charlotte feared that everything would be lost, and if the palace found out, her budget would be cut or completely withdrawn. And only one person remained who could release her, and she asked John to send a letter to someone. Duke Adler appeared instantly and asked what had happened and why the princess was sitting there like that. Charlotte joked that all women have moments when they want to get rowdy. So she is here for disorderly conduct while drunk and still wearing a wig. The princess was sure that in front of the guards stood the criminal himself, whom they were looking for so diligently. Adler noticed that the situation was strange. The investigation into a serial killer was in full swing, and his fiancée was accidentally locked up in the department with a charge. Usually a criminal would worry if he ended up in a place where he was being investigated. But apparently the serial killer didn't care, according to Charlotte. The Duke released her, and the lady thanked the young man for his urgent help. he being the only one who helped her. The young man admitted that, in any case, he had nothing else to do, and suddenly, he offered to have a date with his fiancée. And she really wanted to go on a date with the man who had just gotten out of the police station. Charlotte suggested visiting a restaurant that serves delicious steaks. But it seems the young man wasn't very keen on going there, but he accepted the princess's proposal. The luxury restaurant was called Escolto, and it was the place where the second murder occurred, where the murdered person was the chef. It was a great opportunity to find out how the chef was related to this person. The Duke opted for a certain degree of frying, and the princess was indignant. Such frying was disrespectful to the meat. And in her opinion, the best steak is one that has a little blood, so that the taste of the meat is better revealed. The young man asked why the lady decided to change her appearance and get drunk in that alley. Charlotte tried to convince him that stress builds up in all people sooner or later, so she supposedly just wanted to get drunk to forget. Suddenly, Adler said that perhaps the reason was in him, and he regretted that incident at Lady Mostyn's ball. And that day, he made a big mistake. Charlotte said she wanted to help her sister because soon they would become one family. Adler looked quite strange today, and clearly something was going on with the young man today. Charlotte was really offended by Renicues. Throughout his life, everything went as he wanted, but with the princess, everything went exactly the opposite. The day she ended up in prison, the Duke's carriages, which were always ready to be used, today were occupied by his sister or his stepmother. The servant said the wait would be half an hour, but Adler immediately wanted to look at the shameless face of the girl who was detained. She was sitting in the cell dressed as a commoner and had not a drop of makeup on her face. And even at that moment, this incredibly troublesome lady looked incredibly charming. His assistant spoke normally. Girls who want to break up or are angry can change their hairstyle or become addicted to alcohol. Charlotte herself defended the position that she was simply sad and wanted to forget herself this way. The Duke apologized for the first time in his life and shamefully asked for forgiveness because through his negligence, he dared to offend the lady. Suddenly, the young man felt relief, and his relieved heart began to beat faster. And perhaps Charlotte was exactly the person to whom you can tell everything. The young man said that he actually didn't want to come here, and his last memories of this restaurant were very sad. The princess wondered if the Duke was really going to talk about the murder himself. The last time Adler visited this establishment, the chef decided to change the degree of frying at his discretion. The princess wondered if the dish prepared differently could have served as the motive for the murder. The Duke said that he actually goes into a panic when he smells blood, and that day, he almost showed this unworthy side to his stepmother and sister with whom he had lunch. But something doesn't add up in Charlotte's head, and the murderer, who graduated with honors from the military academy, goes into a panic at the smell of blood. He said that when his mother was dying, there was a lot of blood from coughing, and now every time he smells blood, he remembers his mother's death. And this was the main reason why he did not continue his studies at the academy. And he couldn't enlist in the army with such symptoms. The young man mourned the death of his mother and never told anyone about it. And the princess immediately asked to change her steak to a raw and bloodless one. Witnessing the death of one's parents is not an easy thing for anyone. Even if we talk about the villain of this story, the girl convinced her parents to go to an amusement park. And in a car where it was impossible to identify the victims, she was the only survivor. If she hadn't begged her parents to go to the park, they would still be alive. And every day she reproached herself for these thoughts. She perfectly understood the Duke, who felt guilty for being absent during his mother's illness. But the princess convinced him not to blame himself. It was impossible to develop feelings for the object of the investigation, but Charlotte unintentionally comforted him. There was complete confusion in her head, and the girl was completely confused by everything that was happening. Suddenly, she jumped out of bed and told herself that she could not relax and that all the evidence had been falsified. It was necessary to analyze everything she knew about the site. And the cause of the Marquis's death was not strangulation. And most likely, the evidence was tampered with to attribute the crime to a serial killer. Or the evidence was manipulated only in the Marquis' murder, but not in all victims. Charlotte did not have the opportunity to examine the bodies of previous victims. Maids use a rather simple method for tying knots, but this knot was completely different. And if we think that the victims died from poisoning and not from suffocation, the criminal does not have to be a bulky man. Over 180 centimeters tall. A few days ago, the princess heard testimony about the first victim from Lady Blair. This man was quite distracted in his work, so his brother fired him. The stepmother was against such a decision and asked to take his position then. Upon learning of his fate, after that lady became a governess. Lady Mostyn regretted it very much. The second reason was that the cook changed the degree of frying at his discretion. Both victims had a point of contact with the Duke, and they had once annoyed him. The Duke, of course, was a rather cold person, but he did not seem at all like someone capable of murder and suddenly he was no longer a murderer, but simply a suspect. After some time, a meeting was scheduled, at which the emperor reported that last time they could not finish the meeting humanely due to an attempted poisoning. So he decided again to gather everyone. Today they were joined by the Marquis of Dust, and Camilla had a strong influence on him. He came to hear the emperor's opinion on a matter, but his words contained many legal terms. And some did not understand what he was talking about. The young man first asked for the opinion of Princess Charlotte, who did not expect at all that they would now always ask her first. She got up from her chair and said she wondered where to start, since legal terms did not frighten her. After a while, the Marquis listened to the lady and told her he had nothing more to add, and that her advice was very good. The emperor was satisfied with her answer and said that Charlotte had recently not left the library and was constantly studying. Soon, an Imperial League meeting would be held in which representatives from the countries of the Asgardian Empire would participate, represented by high-ranking officials, to perpetuate and confirm the friendship of the peoples. However, in reality, this was simply a way to show their loyalty to the emperor and to the empire to which these countries belong. He said that this time the event would be celebrated more solemnly than ever, so that no other country would dare to do something similar to what Cortina did. The servant asked if they should prepare to celebrate Princess Camilla's birthday at the Imperial Palace this year. But the emperor unexpectedly announced that this year they would prepare to celebrate Princess Charlotte's birthday at the Imperial Palace. The birthdays of princes and princesses are usually celebrated in their own palaces. But the birthday of one of the emperor's children, whom he chooses, is usually celebrated in the Imperial Palace for several years in a row. The choice fell on Camilla, and it seemed that she would be the heir to the throne. The last time there was an assassination attempt, Prince Philip said that if Princess Charlotte had not suspected that something was wrong, Camilla would have been the only one alive among them and would have taken the throne. There was no direct evidence, but apparently these words were enough for the emperor to doubt Camilla. Duke Adler approached the lady after the meeting and reminded her that today was the important day of their meeting. This time, Duke Adler was the first to initiate a conversation with the princess. But for some reason, she felt constrained. She had no idea what to talk to him about now, because she couldn't figure out if he was a murderer or not. The young man praised her knowledge of the empire's laws and invited Charlotte to be his partner at this ball in honor of the Imperial League meeting. The young man immediately said that he liked this event and that it would not be a burden for him to be there. The young man asked if the girl wanted to say something, and she sadly lowered her head as if she wasn't herself. But the lady joked that he was too handsome to be so sad. Adler's face immediately changed upon hearing the pleasant words from his fiancée's lips. And this shy boy certainly didn't look like a cold-blooded murderer who was blushing from compliments. Charlotte had seen many serial killers, but Duke Adler was very different from their behavior. He reported that he had heard that on the day of Lady Mostyn's debut, Charlotte's dress was ruined. And if she is to be the partner for the Imperial League meeting, she must look her best in a dress. The young man said it would be good if they bought a new dress for the event at the best boutique in the empire. He was sure he had made a big mistake at the last ball and couldn't live in peace. But the princess offered to pay for the purchase herself. Upon arriving at the palace, Charlotte realized that buying a dress from the most fashionable house in the empire could cost a lot of money. But Hudson was sure that, if His Highness was accurately identified at the meeting, and her birthday was also celebrated, her situation would definitely improve. But their conversation was interrupted by John, who asked if aristocrats really buy clothes for every event. Hudson told the young man to keep his useless statements to himself, because he was in the same room as the princess. Charlotte also thought that everything was excessive, and it is very possible that she has a dress she has never worn. And she will have to learn a lot before the event. And she will also have to choose dresses for at least one day. John said he would go do the important things the princess had entrusted him with, and that he would return tomorrow when he had time. They sat down to discuss the investigation. It turned out that the princess last saw the Marquis of Breguet on the day of Lady Mostyn's ball. John said that a conflict erupted between him and the Marquis that day, and after that day, no one saw Breguet and, as is already known, he was later found dead. But it was interesting why the nobleman was on Node Street, and it seems he went there to meet one of the merchants. The Marquis's hands were not clean, despite him winning the jackpot. And he became the commander of Cortina after joining the Imperial Army. Recently, rumors have spread that the Empire has started selling captured children orphaned after the war. John said that, of course, this was forbidden by law, but a nobleman cannot be accused of such a crime without solid proof. Charlotte said that she supposedly couldn't examine the corpse and simply inspected the morgue. She was sure there was no need to show John all the letters at that moment. John's court records indicated that he served as an investigator and investigated the atrocities of the Marquis of Breguet against the people of Cortina, and reported them to his superior. However, the junior lieutenant ordered the case to be closed. John started to resist and pointed a gun at him, and John, seeing the threat, decided to neutralize the lieutenant. In the end, it all ended up in court with charges of assaulting his superiors. And the Marquis of Breguet was the same person who committed perjury against John in court. Therefore, John could easily hold a grudge against the Marquis, in which case he could be considered a suspect. And Charlotte was sure that now no one in the palace could be trusted until everything became clear. Charlotte arrived at the most elegant house in the empire, and the lady who ran it was already waiting for her. She reported that Duke Adler was ordered to serve his fiancée with special care. The lady asked permission to show the princess the most luxurious dresses from the new collection. The dresses looked luxurious and probably cost a lot of money, but the quick Hudson offered to cut Watson's salary just once. Dresses of different styles and colors hung in front of her on golden hangers. Charlotte first put on an exquisite dress, made of delicate blue gauze with embroidered flowers. That wonderfully embraced her figure and gave her lightness and grace. Then she put on an exuberant golden dress, decorated with shining stones and patterns made of silver. And it shone on her like a starry sky, and every dress gave her an appearance and a special character, reflecting her beauty and inner strength. A few hours later, she decided on a dress, and she probably shouldn't have refused the Duke's offer to buy her a dress. They showed her the receipt, and the dress she bought last time was twice as expensive. And it couldn't be that cheap. Charlotte was not an expert in dresses, but to her, it was obvious that this price was very strange. The boutique lady assured that the price was valid. But the princess remembered very well that the Duke had already warned her of his arrival. And clearly there was something suspicious here, but Charlotte still benefited from that deal, even if the Duke was behind it. They left the elegant house. A torrential downpour was falling outside, and John warned that the princess might catch a cold. He offered to bring an umbrella and call a carriage, and a little rain was nothing for the former soldier. Mr. Watson could be very rude sometimes, but now he seemed quite kind. And Charlotte seemed to have chosen an excellent assistant. While the ladies were standing in the rain, Duke Adler appeared out of nowhere, which was very strange. But when they entered the elegant house, Charlotte couldn't even think that her future husband was lurking nearby. He was very glad that Charlotte had picked up the dress. She replied that she was waiting for the carriage to arrive, and asked why the young man was in that place. He said he was here on business, but for Charlotte, it couldn't be an accident when the young man ended up near the boutique she had reserved for his fiancée. But no matter what thoughts arose in his mind in his favor, the Duke remained the main suspect. And it was no wonder he was looking for the right moment to kill her. A young man approached them with an umbrella, whom the Duke introduced as his secretary Alfred. The lady thought, surely his secretary should know about all the matters the Duke is dealing with. And if she can speak into his ear, it will be possible to extract the necessary information from him. The Duke suddenly announced that the lady had no reason to be interested in his secretary. And Charlotte replied that it had nothing to do with her assistant. The Duke handed the girl an umbrella and asked her to take it to shelter from the rain. And he himself asked permission to leave, as very urgent matters awaited him. Charlotte's gaze fell on something very strange. The umbrella was tied with a rope. But its knot was different. Alfred and the Duke got into the carriage, and the young man's clothes were all wet before the important meeting. And the fact that his jacket is wet will definitely not ruin his business. Alfred said that he told the saleswoman at the fashion house to sell the princess a dress for a minimum price, and not to sell other dresses to anyone else in exchange for paying the rent. But for the young man, the most important thing was that Princess Charlotte herself personally paid for this dress. And he was proud of himself that only Princess Charlotte would wear a dress from Emmers to the ball. John returned and reported that there were no good umbrellas in any store. And apparently they all sold out quickly because the rain came suddenly. The young man noticed that the lady had already acquired an umbrella without him, and Hudson immediately reported that they accidentally met Duke Adler. And he carefully gave his umbrella to the princess. In this case, Sir Watson suggested that the girl hold the umbrella until the carriage so she could arrive without getting wet. A little later this did happen, and the lady managed to catch a cold in that very downpour. A weak body is a problem, but apparently this rope was too shocking for Charlotte. However, it is unlikely that the Duke himself personally tied her to the umbrella. And for a moment, the girl thought she was justifying him. The princess asked if Hudson had warned that the tea party with Lady Blair was cancelled. But another maid said that Duke Adler had come to visit the princess, but that she hadn't told anyone yet that she was sick. He entered the room and greeted the princess. She was sitting on the bed and had no hair, and Charlotte apologized for meeting the young man in such an unprepared manner. The Duke said there was no need to apologize, and he himself, not very politely, entered the princess's chambers without invitation. The young man wanted to clear up misunderstandings beforehand and called himself a gentleman who never entered the private rooms of girls. But Charlotte said she really doesn't care who enters her rooms, and that there is nothing wrong with that. The princess asked the reason for his visit, because today was definitely not a date. But the young man unexpectedly announced that he had come to collect the umbrella he lent her yesterday during the rain. And he came here only for that, as this was very dear to him. But the princess saw only an excuse in his words. And judging by the way he looked around the room, the Duke definitely came here to ask questions about the princess. And the criminal always chooses the murder scene beforehand. The young man decided to find out why the girl hadn't been writing him letters lately, and if she had informed him of her illness beforehand via a letter. Such a curious situation would not have happened. Charlotte promised to let him know next time, and was annoyed that the young man blamed everything on her. The princess warned the Duke not to come closer, so as not to catch the infection. But the young man didn't care. He approached the girl's bed. Charlotte knew that there were too many witnesses in the palace now, and that the Duke definitely wouldn't kill her. He took her hand and told her that her body was too weak, and she couldn't even squeeze his wrist to break it. And her pulse seems too fast, but Charlotte said it was because of the temperature. The young man said he heard that a cold disappears if you infect someone in return. And he continued to hold the lady's wrist. She didn't understand what he meant, but the maid arrived in time and brought hot tea. Hudson asked if the princess saw the beautiful bouquet the Duke brought to her chambers. and the princess became very emotional when she saw a huge bouquet of soft blue and blue flowers on the table. The young man said it was high time they said goodbye and asked the girl to take care of her health in the future. And it was very strange for her to hear her murderer tell her to be careful. Charlotte finally managed to rest and lie down in bed, and the illness came to her at just the right time. But her calm was again disturbed by John, who always appeared at an unexpected moment. A few hours ago, it spread in Duke Adler's domains that the princess was sick. Her sister confirmed that she had caught a cold and received the news that the tea party had been cancelled. Blair insisted that the young man visit his fiancée, but he was sure that coming to the chambers without an invitation was too ignorant. In this case, he would have to reschedule his plans, and besides, the meeting was not scheduled. He soon headed to Charlotte's palace with a beautiful bouquet in his hands, after having heard his sister's words. But he was her fiancé, and theoretically, he could see his future wife at any time. But after the meeting, he was sure that he would definitely have gone crazy if he dared to show up without an invitation. Upon leaving the room, he ran into a young man, and it was the same man who escorted the princess on the day of the ball. The Duke had crossed paths with him a couple of times at military school and remembered that he possessed extraordinary skills, despite his low birth. And this was the man who calmly entered the princess's chambers. The Duke asked what the young man had forgotten here, and John replied that he was responsible for the princess's safety. And he appears here much more often than His Highness. The Duke turned around and warned that in such a case he would be expected to work until he dropped, if the protection and security of his fiancée required it. The lady asked if he had managed to find out anything new about the murders, and stated that the young man came here only to file a report. And if he wanted to visit her because she was sick, that visit would be accompanied by flowers and fruit, not paperwork. He handed her a stack of documents with information about the third victim, the bakery's ledger, and activity data. It was known that the bakery owner was a very good-natured person and was engaged in charitable activities, distributing free bread to poor families. John smiled and immediately refused to reveal his secrets about where he managed to get valuable information. Charlotte said she would only deal with the papers when she felt better from her illness. She politely asked him to leave the papers on the table when he left the room. But the princess suddenly dropped a stack of papers, and all the important documents were scattered in different directions on the floor. John assured the lady that he himself would pick up the documents and stack them on the table so she could familiarize herself with them. But Charlotte's attention was drawn to the rope with which John had just tied a bundle of papers. And this knot was very similar to those on the ropes of the strangled victims found in evidence. The outstanding skills of a commoner and native of a poor family from Node can also become a curse for him. Despite all his achievements, the aristocracy was always one step ahead of him in the end. And the commoners from the military academy were so few that they could be counted on the fingers of one hand. Therefore, he was content with the lowest rank, and even this was a luxury for him. And in this hard-to-reach position, the only thing he saw was anarchy, immorality, and permissiveness of the officers, which was determined by their imperial rank of warriors, and also the aristocratic cartel, which knew it very well and turned a blind eye. But the one who rightly objected and declared a protest ended up behind bars. Although unjust orders came from the aristocrats, they were the only ones to blame. And only the commoner John was found guilty. He was demoted and labeled a criminal. And the one who lent him a hand was Princess Charlotte. At the first meeting, the princess made a surprising proposal. She said that the young man had been treated unfairly, and throughout the entire empire, she was the only aristocrat who said something like that. If she got involved with him, she could definitely get into something. But it was too tempting an offer to refuse, so he decided he could sell his loyalty, even if it was fake. However, contrary to rumors, the princess turned out to be a cunning girl, and simple. And moreover, she turned out to have a certain magical charm that left no one indifferent. Another thing that distinguished her from the rumors was the love directed towards Duke Adler. and he was the one who was as inaccessible as the sky to the commoner. It seems the Duke treated her coldly that day at Lady Mostyn's ball, as the princess looked quite devastated in the garden. And all John could offer was useless comfort. And yet, with these words, he meant that the princess should not be offended by cold men and insensitive ones. And the princess stared at the young man and held her breath, and John got very scared. John asked excitedly if everything was all right with the princess, and why she was looking at him with such a strange look. He approached her and touched her face with his hands, seeing Charlotte's frightened eyes. He asked about the strange knot on the stack of papers, and the young man said that this is how knots are usually tied in Cortina. This knot took hold very reliably in the army, so he got used to using this method in the academy. And after training, tying ropes this way becomes a habit. Charlotte said that this knot was similar to the one the criminal used with his victims. And John was indignant if she really thought he was a murderer. And if we think about it, he cannot be a murderer at the time the victims appeared. He was exiled to Cortina. And in this case, all graduates of the military academy should be suspects. He asked if, until that moment, the lady's main suspect had been Duke Adler. Charlotte replied that he matched all the clues and also had a connection with the victims. That's why she ordered to find out about him, because before the wedding she should at least have found out if he was a murderer. Or not. John was surprised and said that only Charlotte could suspect that Duke Adler had murdered the Empire. Even though she literally bought his share, John helps in her investigation from the bottom of his heart. Charlotte said she believed him because that time he didn't let her get wet in the rain. She suggested that she didn't like Duke Adler, and after these words, she began to cough hard. Charlotte said she wasn't so careless as to fall in love with suspects, and that John would help her until the end anyway. He joked that it cost the princess dearly, and that it was time to compensate for his contribution to her release. Perhaps because the lady had relieved the tension, her body relaxed, and the medicine took effect. And she asked John to give her a break. The young man arranged her blanket and asked her to get well soon, and promised to take care of all the hard work. A few days later, Charlotte felt much better and could return to the investigation. The third victim was from a bakery. This establishment was popular with common residents due to its delicious bread. And Charlotte could not find any connection with Duke Adler. However, she made a big profit, and no matter how popular the bakery was, it probably couldn't generate such income, and there must be something else here. Hudson arrived with an envelope in his hands and said that Duke Adler had written about their upcoming date. This time, the young man invited the princess to choose the place for the date she would like to go to. Charlotte expressed her desire to go to Baker Street, and this place was a very unusual place for a date. The princess had to invent a story. Supposedly she found out from a friend who advised her to go there. The Duke said he should probably go there with his friend, but the lady insisted that she wanted to go with him. And that's why she called him here. Charlotte wanted to go together like ordinary people and asked not to call security so they could be alone. On the way, they stopped at a simple clothing store, where they were greeted by an overly smiling salesman. Charlotte said they came here to buy this man clothes that wouldn't attract attention. Now the Duke was too dazzling and did not fit at all on the street they were heading to. The young man looked at the jackets and said that for the first time he would wear ready-made clothes, and not tailored. The salesman offered to help them try on several suits, which they selected together. And Charlotte remained waiting on the Duke's sofa with a new look. She heard the salesman praise the Duke's muscles and stature, and got angry because he was so damn handsome. And what irritated her most was that he combined a hot body and the appearance of a cold man. And handsome. Charlotte was amazed by the beautiful suit because the Duke looked simply incomparable in it. She asked if this outfit was suitable for him, and the princess agreed. And the suit was completely to her taste, just like the Duke himself, who also smelled incredibly of perfume. The Duke said he would take everything sold in this store, and even this would not be as large a sum as the cost of the suits he wore today. Charlotte noticed that this guy is secretly greedy for clothes, and those comments are normal. More or less among girls. The princess said he was missing a hat, and it highlighted his straight hair too much. And shiny. And speaking of hair, Charlotte is clearly not lagging behind. She put the hat on his head, held out her hand, and announced confidently that they were heading to Baker Street. They walked down a sunny city street, and the young man decided to find out if the princess had thought exactly where she had decided to go. He suggested going to one of the large restaurants, which the customers of that bakery frequented. And bread and desserts had been supplied there for a long time, so it was worth starting the investigation from there. Charlotte chose her favorite dishes from the menu and made sure to take the chocolate cake. The Duke hadn't ordered anything yet, and he seemed uncomfortable in that place. Even during training at the military school, he ate much better than in this place. But the girl whispered that this would be her little secret. She said she used to sneak to these places, and with her order, they brought the same bread that the bakery supplied her. And it turned out they had changed suppliers. Its owner had an accident, and the waitress said he was a wonderful person. She said the bakery had wonderful cakes and sweets, and the products were addictive. As if they were magical. The Duke was unfamiliar with this pastry shop and wondered why the lady was so interested in it. Surely he didn't need to know, but Charlotte suddenly started talking about housekeeping. Something she wouldn't do after the wedding. She cut a large piece of chocolate cake with cream and invited the young man to try it. She blushed and did not expect such behavior from the lady, but Charlotte insisted on not acting like a bore. She succeeded, and the young man, red with shame, chewed a piece of delicious cake. The cake was too sweet, and the lady obviously felt the difference between the cakes from that pastry shop. And the inconsistency she felt in the sweet shop's notes was due to the fact that there wasn't a word about the purchase of flavors. And sugar. One cannot do without them in a confectionery. There were no costly expenses, so the revenue was simply huge. But the Duke was not caught during the false interrogation, although he deliberately distorted information about the sex and the cause of the victim's death. And it was unclear whether he knew how to evade it or really knew nothing. Sugar was a monopolistic business that passed from the imperial family to the aristocrats. And it belonged to Marquis Dust, and the fourth victim is Marquis Dust's secretary. A few hours later, they arrived at another establishment that opened here on the site of a pastry shop. It was a new bar, and Charlotte promised with a smile not to cause a commotion with alcohol so as not to go to jail. She ordered several cocktails, and Charlotte took a moment and asked the bartender how it was possible that there was no more bakery here, since the pastry shop had been open for quite some time. Next to them at the table sat some young men who were already quite drunk. And they were playing cards, and sitting at the game was a man whose debt had just doubled. The bar employee asked the Duke not to pay attention to these people, whom he called loan sharks. They play with debtors, promising to cancel their debts, but after the game, the debts only increase. And they often marry here. Charlotte knew that this was a serious violation of credit law and was a crime. She looked towards the insolent young men and immediately drew attention. Because one of them was the fiercest of all and had just rudely told the princess to lower her eyes and stop looking in his direction, and that was his fatal mistake. The aggressive young man headed towards the bar where Charlotte and Duke Adler were sitting. It seems that after seeing these clothes, the men mistook them for ordinary people. So Charlotte decided to pretend not to understand anything, just receive his blow, and show what real combat is. The stranger attacked the lady, but his blow was skillfully intercepted by the Duke. Who was responsible for the girl's safety? The young man was extremely dissatisfied with what was happening and believed that such behavior was unacceptable. And trying to hit a girl is too frivolous for an adult man. The young man instantly repelled the attack and hit the enemy, and Charlotte noticed that he probably studied well at military school. But if this continues, there will be a fight everywhere, and this madness must stop. An employee of the establishment intervened in the altercation and asked everyone to calm down immediately. And without bloodshed. To settle things, he suggested that they arrange a duel in which they would fight as true men should. The young men took the cards in their hands and looked intently with contempt, sitting opposite each other. Charlotte said the Duke could lose everything and shouldn't do this. But the young man said that in military school, they are severely punished for playing cards. He has already lost his watch, and at this rate, the Duke might return home in his underwear. He asked the girl if she had anything else to bet on, and it seemed that despite the Duke losing everything, he was not going to stop. Among the crowd was the debtor who had gotten involved with this riffraff, and Charlotte noticed him immediately. She asked the Duke to move and told him that her team would have a replacement for the main player. The lady confidently bet her brooch, but got a fool on the first try, and immediately recovered the Duke's lost watch, and the young man was very surprised how Charlotte could do this. She learned this in a past life from a cunning guy whom she arrested during her investigation into gambling. Charlotte secretly went to illegal games at that time, and in such investigations, you will not arouse suspicion unless you have the right skills. In this way, in her past life, she caught more than 20 people, and now she decided to bet all her money. The man considered her self-confident, but the excitement was greater than him, and he was sure that he would beat the stupid girl. He offered her a deal if she bet everything. She would be free, but if she lost, she would have to pay with her body. Charlotte showed the second card. It was a royal flush, and the arrogant girl won again. She showed the men the contract they had drawn up before the game, and they still couldn't believe what had happened. Charlotte smiled and said, "You can't always be so arrogant," and pointed to their signatures on the contract. The girl handed the contract and the payment of the debt to that poor man and advised him not to do business with loan sharks. He said he wasn't happy himself, but couldn't do anything because of a sick child who needed medicine. Charlotte gave him her brooch and offered to use it to buy medicine for his son. For the first time in his life, the poor man saw a man who had mercy on a stranger, and thanked the girl wholeheartedly, with tears in his eyes. Charlotte did not benefit from such actions, but her body from a past life reacts this way, seeing even the slightest injustice. The Duke shared that it was the first time he saw cards dealt so fast. But the princess was quite scared that after all this, the young man would not offer to see each other before the wedding. She was very worried that she had caused him trouble, but suddenly, the young man simply approached and hugged her. He squeezed the girl tightly and told her that someone was definitely watching them, and that they needed to be careful. The Duke suggested that maybe it was men from the bar, but if someone knew their true identities, it would be bad. The young man pulled out a revolver, and a strange hooded man was following them. The Duke was warned that he and Charlotte would now have to run a bit to avoid a fight. They held hands and immediately began to flee from the man, who was deliberately spying on them. The Duke took the first turn he could while they were out of sight of their pursuer. Renicues held the girl against his chest, and both held their breath, waiting for the attacker to leave. The stranger was still nearby somewhere, judging by the loud steps and the conversation. He kept looking towards the corner where the lady and the Duke were hiding, but he did not expect an attack. But after a blow from Duke Adler, the young man fell unconscious onto the road and was defeated. He carried a dagger with him, but no one recognized his face, neither the Duke nor Charlotte. The princess wanted to say who was supposedly supposed to watch them, but the young man asked her to keep quiet for the time being. They saw the silhouettes of several more people, and most likely they were all with him at the same time. The Duke took out a revolver and confidently decided that he would have to use it in case of danger. Charlotte took the stick that was in the corner instead of a weapon and prepared to bravely repel the attack. The Duke looked at this sweet girl and said the idea is good, but the lady must be careful not to hurt herself. They waited for the moment when the strangers approached them and pointed a gun at them. But suddenly, a man whom they had known for a long time appeared in front of them. And it was the assistant Alfred. The Duke lowered the gun and asked why the assistant did not follow orders and was not nearby. But he said that he had lost sight of them in the alley. But the stranger watching them, judging by his skills, was not one of them. It turns out His Highness asked Alfred to stay close at a distance, and as a member of the imperial family. The lady does not fully understand where they are. Charlotte lowered her eyes and said sadly, her actions were probably frivolous, But the young man joked that it would be more fun if he saw frail Charlotte waving a huge stick. He stroked the lady's face, and at that moment Charlotte felt a sense of security next to the Duke. And after an unproductive investigation in Baker Street, the busy days of preparing for the ball began. And the lady wanted to die studying these delegations and participating countries. Every day she returned to her bedroom after midnight and looked quite exhausted. John met her in the hallway and asked if the princess was tired from returning so late. All this time, John was waiting for her near the palace and said that it was not difficult for him to ensure security. Charlotte smiled and said she had very good news about her investigation. She was informed that personal security could not enter the ball for the sake of everyone's peace, and that she would be monitored by guards from the courtyard so John could take the day off. The young man considered such an action too reckless judging by the recent chase in Baker Street, because they don't even know who it was. He did not understand why the princess was willing to expose herself to such risks, being close to the only suspect. But Charlotte could not say that she would become the 8th victim, even if she was far from the suspect. And it was very possible that she would not be able to find the criminal and prevent his death. She said she couldn't just distance herself from her fiancé, who would soon become Duke Adler. Disappointment was visible in John's eyes, and he was very afraid to let the lady go without his supervision. Suddenly, Hudson ran up to them, and judging by his cheerful face, he wanted to tell them some news. The important day of the Union's ball has arrived, guests from the highest echelons of society. Dressed in luxurious suits and jewelry, they gathered at the magnificent ball. The ladies, with their exquisite silk and lace dresses, adorned with shining jewels, were delighted with the attentions and compliments from their gentlemen, and the gentlemen, in turn, looking magnificent in their uniforms and tailcoats, demonstrated their elegance and dignity. The beautiful Princess Charlotte was ready for the ball and looked incredible in this luxurious blue satin dress. Hudson was delighted and happy that for once she managed to prepare the best dress. With his sumptuous white velvet tailcoat, adorned with gold embroidery and mother-of-pearl buttons, the Duke looked magnificent and worthy of his high title, his blonde hair neatly combed, and his eyes shining with confidence and brilliance of intellect, preparing to meet the distinguished representatives of society at this important event. Charlotte saw before her an embodiment of dazzling beauty, comparable to the light of 1,000 light bulbs. The young man tenderly congratulated the lady on her appearance, and Charlotte instantly smiled. She thanked him that, thanks to him, she bought this dress for almost nothing, but the Duke still denied his involvement in this. Everyone was very busy with preparations, and there were no more incidents in the palace. The Duke reported that the man who chased them turned out to be Prince Frederick's man. He turned out to be weak and talkative when he was shot with a gun, and immediately admitted who was behind him and giving instructions. Charlotte knew that Frederick had always been hostile towards her and always showed his hatred at breakfast. But now he kept her under surveillance to find weak spots and exploit them. He carried a dagger with him, even if there was a serious punishment for trying to kill a member of the imperial family. He would try to do it and take it to the end. Prince Frederick ordered him to bring any information about the princess that could be used, and, since they had his confession, it could be made public within the imperial family. The Duke said he was ready to testify and asked the princess not to worry that the prince would try to absolve himself of guilt. It's not so rare for the imperial family to ask questions about others. Even if Charlotte talks about a situation where she was not injured, the consequences for Frederick will not be the same. On the contrary, it may turn out that she walked around Baker Street like a commoner, and she can be locked up in the palace for undermining the authority of the family. Charlotte understood that she was being taken care of by a man who could kill her, and that's why she often started losing vigilance, even though he is the main suspect. The air at the luxurious ball was saturated with the aromas of flowers and perfumes, creating an atmosphere of sophistication and romance, and smiles, conversations, and laughter filled the hall, making the evening unforgettable for every guest. Everyone focused their attention on the appearance of the most awaited guests, Sir Duke Adler and Princess Charlotte, An elegant lady in a burgundy coat and a hat decorated with the feather of a rare bird came out to meet them. The name of this great lady was Cra. Taylor, and she had an influential status in society. In the empire, this lady owns a business that generates huge profits. She was the emperor's younger sister and the duke's aunt. She said that Charlotte's taste had clearly changed since their last meeting, and she had heard how well the princess had shown herself. Charlotte saved several lives that day through poisoning, including the life of the emperor himself. Moreover, she proposed an excellent idea to solve the problem of the wheat harvest, from which the princess suggested making drinks. The lady said she has the right to produce alcohol, and that luck only comes to those who are prepared for it. And then she invited the princess to the next tea party and asked Charlotte to honor them with her presence. Mrs. Taylor's tea party was actually a political gathering of the most powerful women in the empire. And being invited there meant having influence in the imperial family and high society. And for Charlotte, this meant that, unknowingly, she entered a real struggle for the throne. Now, all of society's attention was focused on her, and it was a completely opposite image to the one she showed at Count Mostyn's party. She was greeted by a young man who introduced himself as Derek von Lindemann. Charlotte knew that all attention would focus on her, and it was good that she had prepared in advance for the meeting with the guests, whose achievements she had been teaching about for several nights. The Duke approached at that moment and informed Mr. Lindemann that the princess would soon need to participate in the event's inauguration. Charlotte said she didn't even have time to say a few words, but the Duke asked if the lady had any reason to talk to him. The princess really didn't have any message to talk to the young man, and he approached first. But the Duke really didn't like it when someone allowed themselves to touch something that belonged to him without knowing its value. Duke Killian, with whom Charlotte had a special connection in the past, appeared at the ball. He stopped in front of the princess and the Duke, and Charlotte silently looked at her old acquaintance. The princess asked if the young man had any business, and he recalled that at the last ball he asked to observe etiquette. Then he approached to bow and greet Princess Charlotte. Killian asked if Duke Adler would not participate in the meeting of the allied countries. And for everything to go well, who but him should know how important this meeting is, where leaders from different countries meet. He said he was going there immediately after taking the princess to the hall. Killian said this matter can be entrusted to him because he is also involved as part of the imperial family. Killian invited the princess to go there with him, but the Duke said he wasn't too busy not to be able to accompany the princess. And from Killian's side, this looks less like a proposal and more like a serious intervention. But Killian said the Duke was interfering with orders, and that he found it difficult to tolerate such an attitude. If the young man had an open argument now, they would only become a topic of discussion later. And Charlotte invited her to make the decision herself. Killian said the princess can do what she knows, because she always does only what her soul wants. And if the Archduke doesn't stand in her way, Duke Adler will have enough time to accompany her. And the young man said that Killian can now leave them alone and quietly attend to his business. And as Charlotte already said, she has always been honest with Killian, and this time is no exception. They went out into the courtyard, and Renigius asked if the princess had always been frank with him. Charlotte reported that she had forgotten all the men with whom she had connections in the past. The Duke asked if it was all due to her dazzling beauty and excellent manners. He remembered how the princess had recently admired his beauty and could not forget these words. The young man asked again if the girl had really forgot all the men after meeting him, and he tenderly kissed Charlotte's hand as a sign of reverence and respect. He said he must make even more effort so that the princess would forget all the men and her attitudes. And when they finished the event and the meetings, he promised to take Charlotte home. And the lady shouldn't even think about being accompanied by any other man this time. Evening of the Imperial Family was the name given to the place where delegations from colonial countries greeted the Imperial Family. The meeting took place in another reception room of a separate palace, and some of the guests were already there. Camilla looked at Charlotte with great anger and seemed to feel competition from her for canceling her reservation at Emmers. Only now is Charlotte treated like a human being, but before she had developed a peculiar reputation. The emperor announced the start of the meeting and asked all honorable present to prepare. Charlotte thought, on the one hand, it would be better to contain the members of the imperial family. But on the other hand, there were His Majesty and Her Majesty. And it seemed that today the princess saw for the first time in person the empress, who held great power. Therefore, her children Camilla and Frederick became the main candidates for heirs to the throne. The empress felt special contempt for Charlotte and considered her a fool wandering the streets. And in this case, His Highness knew firsthand about the dirty streets. She probably meant Baker Street, where the princess had recently been. Which means she was really watching her along with Frederick. The empress has always been on Frederick's or Camilla's side, and now it is clear that she only sees Frederick as the successor. Charlotte realized what was happening. She bowed and courteously greeted Her Highness. She knew how the empress treated her, because Charlotte was the daughter of some servant. But she was not willing to fall for her tricks and be fooled by the provocations of the lady who saw competition in her. The solemn greeting of the imperial family began, and all the guests awaited the ceremony with anticipation. Delegations with hands full of gifts from different countries lined up in a long queue in front of the emperor. Charlotte observed what was happening and hoped to find some information about her investigation. Mr. Frederick said he would like to inform His Majesty about the sugar supply to the state of Demios. He introduced Charles Odgerton, the owner of the largest sugar cane federation, who wanted to demonstrate his deepest loyalty to the empire. The emperor said that good suppliers would always be needed, and Frederick announced that he planned to supply sugar to all allied countries. The empress realized what a great friend Frederick was, and he himself went to the dangerous lands of Demios and reached an agreement. And the annual income from such an agreement would certainly exceed large sums. And she considered Frederick's act simply magnificent. It seems Camilla didn't know about it, and the imperial family is a place where you can't trust even relatives. Charlotte looked at this Charles and felt a strong sense of danger from his presence. Due to his previous job, once she knew a person's name, she could never forget it. And she could recognize him even in disguise. Charlotte had seen his face when she studied the documents of the imperial alliances over the past 10 years. But it was definitely not Charles. He said he had a sugar cane plantation in the mining country, and the land would not remain unusable because of it. Charlotte remembered this face. The young man was definitely from Cortonia, and 5 years ago he visited as a delegate. And his name is Sebastian Morgan. There was sugar in his bag. When small particles meet fire, an explosion occurs. And he was about to do it right now. Charlotte shouted his real name, and those present looked intently at the guest. The young man immediately realized that he had been identified and that it was necessary to execute the plan quickly. Charlotte ordered this man to be arrested immediately because he is a criminal. The young man grabbed the bag and spilled its entire contents around the guests. And the emperor. The princess screamed loudly for everyone to run out of here as fast as possible towards any shelter. Everyone rushed to run to the hallway to be in a safe place in case of an explosion. The young man had to be stopped quickly before he had time to light the fire. And Killian jumped on the criminal from behind. He grabbed his arms, twisted them behind his back, and threw the stranger to the ground. Charlotte took the white ribbon from her hair and gave it to the young man to tie his hands and neutralize the criminal who had just wanted to commit an attack. The young man asked if the princess was okay, and she found it strange that he was worried. The tied criminal suddenly began to roll on the floor, and it seemed that he still had a match in his hands. And this was the worst thing that happened after Charlotte's transformation, because the next second there was a loud explosion. Charlotte woke up with intense pain in her body, but she had no idea where she was. She looked around and saw another person next to her, and of course it was Killian. The young man lay among the ruins near the debris and showed no signs of life. Charlotte checked his pulse, and it turned out the young man was alive and was simply unconscious now. Rolling on Sebastian Morgan's carpet created a static charge and caused an explosion. and the sugar dust reacted violently to the small sparks. And if Charlotte hadn't ended up under Killian's body, she probably would have died already. They found themselves in a hidden cave. Charlotte thought that if the Duke was here, someone would definitely come for him. And it was unlikely anyone would dig for her. But she still held out hope that a man would come looking for her, even if he didn't know if she was alive. Or not. Charlotte saw a light ahead, and this path clearly had to lead somewhere. She grabbed Killian's legs and tried to pull him out, gripping his ankles with both hands. But after a while, she was sitting on the rocks next to the young man and thought that if she left him, because of the weight, it would be much easier to move alone. It is difficult for her to take care of herself now, so she could not die because of a man with whom she has no relationship. She took a couple of steps forward, but turned back and thought that she could not leave a person in danger. So the fragile princess had to carry the heavy Killian and try to get out together.